Welcome, everyone. It's Dumpster Times, issue number 24. And we are fast approaching the end of the year. A lot of people are taking little breaks. I'm going to take a sort of different approach. Today's story is going to be short. I'm thinking my lighting looks really good today. Take a load off, Fanny. Take a load for free. Take a load off, Franny. And when you're done, you can put another one right on me. You can see my voice is very low today. So we're going to do just one story, but it's a good story, I promise you. Looking at the calendar, I see that next Monday is a certain holiday. I didn't plan for my show to come out on a holiday, but I will live up to expectations and react to the greatest Christmas song of all time from an atheistic point of view. And then the next Monday is January 1st. We're going to celebrate 2024. It's got to be better than the last one, right? That's what we always say around here. But let's go into the dumpster and look at today's story. Come on in. I magically decided to change hats. We're going to be talking about a monument and a sculpture that is about to be removed from our national cemetery, National Arlington Cemetery, because it has racist imagery carved into it. And let's take a look at this sculpture and learn a little bit more about it, because there was a whole genre of these sculptures. There was a whole movement to install these sculptures around the country between the 1900s and the 1930s. This article was written by Kalli Holloway and published March 25th, 2019. It's very relevant today because by December 23rd, the monument, the racist monument in our national cemetery, Arlington National Cemetery, is supposed to be removed from that site. So let's read a little bit about the history of these kinds of monuments. I really knew nothing about it until I stumbled across a story, which led to some more stories, which led to this fabulous piece, which is in-depth reporting, and I will leave a link to it in the description below, because I'm not going to be able to read all of it today because my voice is very flimsy right now. Loyal slave monuments tell a racist lie about American history. These monuments, nearly all of them still standing, prop up the fantasy that slaves were happy, loyal, and devoted to those who enslaved them. Here's a picture of one side of the statue where you see a black mammy handing a white baby to a Confederate soldier for one last kiss before he goes off to fight to continue her slavery. On the other side of the statue's frieze is an image of a Confederate soldier with his black slave marching beside him off to war. As America's racist historical myths go, the loyal black slave is one of the most enduring, destructive, and tightly held. Emerging from the white Southern racial imagination in the 1830s, the faithful slave personified slave owners' defensiveness against a growing abolitionist movement and its condemnations of slavery and slaveholders as evil and immoral. The loyal slave trope insisted that enslaved blacks labored for their enslavers not out of self-preservation and deeply instilled fear, but as an expression of love, fidelity, and devotion. After the Civil War ended in their humiliating defeat, white Southerners attempted to retroactively justify the Confederacy with the lost cause ideology, an ahistorical narrative that further reimagined the Old South as filled with happy enslaved blacks. The loyal slave became a stock character in slavery apologia, from Gone with the Wind to pancake mix ad campaigns to, perhaps less famously, a little known subgenre of Confederate monuments. Nearly all of those overtly racist memorials still stand in sites around the South. And I might add that happy enslaved Black meme image was carried over into popular entertainment of the day, from vaudeville to radio to early television to the movies. We saw those Blacks. You know, I love Mae West, but there are scenes in some of her movies that I can't look at because she is being served by Black servants feeding her grapes. There's that famous line, Beulah, please peel me a grape. She might be satirizing, I don't know. And according to what I've read, she was famously an egalitarian in terms of the people who worked with her, but it's just a sign that that image was still around, and these memorials served to prop up that image. And wherever whites had power in the entertainment industry, that image was the presiding image. All right, back to the story. As with Confederate monuments generally, loyal slave markers communicated not only the white South's nostalgia for a counterfeit version of what once was, but also its belief in what should have been. Constructed not during slavery, but between the 1900s and 1930s, like nearly all Confederate monuments, loyal slave markers served as the visible component of an anti-Black backlash against Black civil rights gains. In the face of African-American empowerment struggles, loyal slave monuments telegraphed the idea that slavery had been the natural state of things. Faithful slave markers also warned Black folks working to overturn the racial caste system in the late 19th and early 20th centuries that they risked the same brutal violence that had kept racial order during slavery. In fact, Black defiance had manifested in 250 slave uprisings, more than 100,000 escapes via the Underground Railroad, and thousands more escaped slaves joining the Union Army before slavery was abolished in 1865. Confederate apologists erected loyal slave monuments to blot out that evidence of Black rebellion. They memorialized a narrative that undercut the myriad ways that African Americans resisted, says Tara Hunter, a professor of American history and African American studies at Princeton University. It was a source of embarrassment for slaveholders that they had to resort to the use of brute force to keep enslaved people in line, because if they were actually content, why would there be a need for corporal punishment? Loyal slave stories and monuments hid that history. They helped soothe the consciousness of those people who believed slavery was a legitimate system and absolved the culpability of those who participated in and benefited from the system of slavery. But the most damaging work the myth did was to create a stereotype of African American people as content with their conditions and therefore complicit in their own bondage. That's one of the many reasons we don't see Confederate monuments to Nat Turner's revolt or other major rebellions that happened. One of the oldest loyal slave monuments was erected in 1895 in Fort Mill, South Carolina, and today stands in the appropriately named Confederate Park. Two opposing sides of the 13-foot-tall marble monument feature bas relief carvings depicting enslaved Blacks, including a mammy figure cradling a white baby. It's an iconic thing. And a Black man cutting wheat. The inscription on one panel praises the faithful slaves who, loyal to a sacred trust, toiled for the support of the army with matchless devotion and sterling fidelity, and guarded our defenseless homes, women and children, during the struggle for the principles of our Confederate States of America. The most famed speaker at the monument's 1896 unveiling was Polk Miller, a white defender of slavery who often performed Black music under the stage name the old Virginia plantation Negro. In their exhaustive history of Charleston, South Carolina, Denmark's Vessey's Garden, Blaine Roberts and Ethan J. Kirtle note that Miller's remarks pitted what he called the uppity turn of the century African American against the Negro of the good old days gone by, suggesting emancipation had been an unfortunate development. For white Southerners having to deal with the reality of Civil War defeat and Black emancipation, the loyal slave narrative becomes a way to move forward, to put the pieces back together, to begin the process of putting together a system of white supremacy, especially after Reconstruction, that places Black Southerners, former slaves, into a subordinate position. Says historian Kevin Levine, a Civil War expert who blogs at Civil War Memory. By the turn of the 20th century, an emerging Black population was beginning to push more aggressively for civil rights. Looking back on the antebellum period, a time when race relations were, in the eyes of white Southerners, peaceful, they were able to avoid dealing with and responding to moments of racial unrest decades after the war. A Columbia, North Carolina, loyal slave monument erected in 1902 offers a note in appreciation of our faithful slaves. Its placement on the grounds of the Tyrrell County Courthouse was intended to send an ominous message to every Black person with the misfortune of seeking justice in its halls. I can't read all of them, but this article is huge in terms of its research and well worth a read. It talks about more monuments, how they came to be. Here's one that didn't come to pass. A more shocking example is a marker that never actually came to pass. In 1923, the UDC received approval from the US Senate, which the same year rejected an anti-lynching bill, to build the monument to faithful colored mammies of the South in Washington, D.C. This is 1923. In Washington, D.C., Senate Bill S4119 designated the proposed marker as a gift to the people of the United States. The then largest Black newspaper in D.C. wrote a fitting response to news of the impending statue, cited in Mickey Michaela's 2007 Clinging to Mammy, the Faithful Slave in 20th Century America. And I quote, the Tribune listed a range of insults or attacks on Black citizenship, culminating in the effort to memorialize the mammy figure by the ones who deny their descendants educational facilities, humiliate them in public conveyances, Jim Crow them in public places, deny them the rights of suffrage of American citizens, and finally insult their race by proposing a statue to commemorate servitude in the capital city of the nation. Project died in House committee, primarily as a result of sustained Black outcry. The first post-civil rights era version of The Loyal Slave appeared in the 1970s, after the success of Alex Haley's Roots miniseries showed a mass audience the horrors of slavery and cast the Confederacy in the same unvarnished light. Neo-Confederate groups set about searching for a counter-narrative. Groups such as the Sons of the Confederate Veterans have cited the enslaved aide-de-camp on the Arlington Confederate Monument, along with various other willfully misinterpreted evidence to prove that thousands of African Americans laid their lives on the line to fight for an army that sought to ensure their enslavement in perpetuity. Like every other version of the loyal slave trope, the Black Confederate soldier is a myth no serious historian believes or promotes, and Levin has dedicated significant scholarship to debunking the idea. Lots of links and footnotes here, so as I said, the link to this article is in the description. Have at it. Fascinating topic. While the happy slave can manifest in the form of a mythical Black character type, the figure is more abstractly embedded in the concept of slavery as a benevolent and even beneficial institution. Recent years have seen multiple white public figures offering unsolicited critiques of Black emancipation as a spoiler of Black life, suggesting that freedom has led to Black pathology. According to this form of hyper-racist concern trolling, African Americans were at their best during centuries of dehumanizing white abuse and domination. One adherent to this idea is rancher Cliven Bundy, whose cows still graze federal grasslands on which he owes nearly 3 decades of back taxes. In 2014, Bundy mused aloud that he'd often wondered, are Blacks better off as slaves, picking cotton and having a family and doing things? Or are they better off under government subsidy? Oh, well, listen, buddy, if you're not paying your taxes, I'd say you're under government subsidy too. Because all the things those taxes are going to that you use and utilize, your roads, your infrastructure, etc., you're benefiting from without paying for it. So who's the more reputable citizen, eh? Similarly, Duck Dynasty star Phil Robertson in 2013 wistfully recalled Blacks in pre-civil rights Louisiana singing and happy as they worked the fields, too filled with songs and joy to complain about racial inequality. In 2010, then Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour spoke about the conditions of Jim Crow in the early 1960s, recalling that, I just didn't remember it as being that bad. Before he was fired from his Fox News show for alleged sexual harassment, Bill O'Reilly told his viewing audience that enslaved Blacks who built the White House were well-fed and had decent lodgings provided by the government, and were treated to meals of meat, bread, and other staples. Pat Buchanan, never one to obscure his racism, most nakedly advanced the dehumanizing racist idea at the heart of the loyal slave trope, that Black people should feel eternally indebted to whites for merely being permitted to exist in this country. In 2008, Buchanan wrote that slavery had been a lucky break for Black people because 600,000 Black people brought from Africa in slave ships grew into a community of 40 million, were introduced to Christian salvation, and reached the greatest level of freedom and prosperity Blacks have ever known. No people anywhere has done more to lift up Blacks than white Americans, Buchanan wrote. We hear the grievances. Where is the gratitude? It's no coincidence that these ideas have been expressed not only as the nation is growing demographically browner and blacker, but when the latest push for African American civil rights has expanded to include calling for the removal of Confederate monuments. Inspired by the success of Take 'em Down NOLA in New Orleans, local chapters of the group in the national Take 'em Down Everywhere movement are now pushing for the removal of Confederate iconography. The Make It Right project, which launched in June last year, is a national initiative dedicated specifically to taking down Confederate monuments. The Hayward Shepherd Loyal Slave marker is among the list of monuments the campaign is targeting for removal. With full transparency, I'm the group's director. Oh, all right. Well, you're doing good work, and no wonder you know so much about this subject. In this environment, the loyal slave mythology continues to be a go-to tool in the neo-Confederate toolbox. Indeed, it is. Think about what's going on in Florida with the State Board of Education being taken over by DeSantis and his crazed people who want to eliminate real history from the curriculum and whitewash things like slavery out of existence. The myth of the faithful slave lingers because so many white Americans have wished to live in a world where African Americans are not angry over past and present injustices. A world in which white people were and are not complicit, in which the injustices themselves of slavery, Jim Crow, and ongoing structural racism seem not to exist at all. As neo-Confederates rally at monument sites and Southern legislatures, states throughout the South enact laws to prevent Confederate monument removal, toxic myths are recycled for the exact same racist purposes. The loyal slave myth and the monuments put up to sell the narrative offer a transparent view how all tributes to the Confederacy honor the dishonorable, erasing historical truth in favor of a white supremacist lie. So there you have it. I'm all for reparations for all the people who were harmed by slavery and their descendants, and also for Native Americans who were truly rooted out of their native lands and treated despicably, and also in countries that we went over and exploited. Reparations for all, everybody. Let's pare things down to an equitable size. We don't need billionaires, we don't need zillionaires, we don't need multimillionaires, really. We need, what do we need? We need safe, happy homes, safe, good food, a planet that is not being choked by our emissions, people who are working on things that make them content and feel positive, and a planet that we are on the brink of losing, we must all save. So there's lots of things that we can be doing. One of the things we don't need to be doing is propping up old attitudes about slavery and racism. So that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. See you next week.